I thought we should kick off with an interesting subject that's called object identification. It's a small problem, but it's something that is central to solving problems in information systems, and it's worth having a chat about. This definitely plays up in databases, and it's one of the core techniques, but it does play in a wider field, in GIS data sets, but essentially also in any other type of data that you hold digitally. Having proper object identifiers is an important thing to get right.
Okay, so can you explain how it works?
There are various techniques. It's important that you understand why it's done. And then the different system that you use for this will essentially allow you one or more techniques to get it implemented. So for that, we need to briefly talk about what's an object. Mm-hmm. And I can only give you a very abstract thing there, because it very much depends on the application that you work in and work for. Objects are essentially things, entities about which you want to hold information in your system. If you are working in a cadastral system, this may be people, or they may be municipalities, or they may be parcels, or they may be title deeds. Any of those can be considered an object. And so these things need an identifier. And the reason for that really is that you can always find them for either use in some type of information service, or for the purpose of updating their associated information, or possibly also for referencing from one thing to the other. Okay. And so those are the three key features that object identification is invented for. And that gives you the problem of essentially ensuring that your system are capable of doing this. And that brings us some subtle questions that you need to address and realize.
Okay, so if I have objects, let's say people in a building, I could just number them from 1 to 100 or something like that?
Definitely, you could do that. And this is a technique that is often applied. But the problem, of course, arises with how does this numbering system hold up over time? If people leave the building, do you then drop the number or reissue it for another person? What happens when the people come back into the building? Do they get the old number or something new? So there are that type of challenge. The numbers themselves, in this case, would be essentially free of semantics. They're just a number. There's no additional meaning to them. And occasionally, perhaps it's wiser to actually provide identifiers that carry some semantics. But then you need to make sure that the semantics is something that lasts over time. That's really fixed to that object. It will never change, not even after genetics are involved or anything.
Okay, so that sounds more complicated than simple numbering. And how do you choose an identifier then?
So this is a balancing act. I just gave you the three possible important reasons for having object identifiers: being able to find things, being able to maintain things, keep the information up to date, or possibly to refer to things. And so it depends on the use case, whether it is more important to make sure that you can rapidly find something, because you know it's never going to change, and then you can essentially focus more on the technique of finding and being fast in that. But if things happen to change very rapidly, then you need to make sure that maintenance that comes with that rapid change is actually accommodated well. So it depends a little bit. But generally, people do resort to numbers. But I need to tell you here that in a way our conversation is really about objects that you hold in a system, persistently in a system, between sessions for prolonged periods of time. But occasionally in computing, and certainly in geospatial computing, you sometimes come up with solutions which may be objects themselves that also need identification. And then you have to be more creative because you will need to dynamically create the identifiers. And again, so the original answer to your question is yes, numbers can work, but sometimes it's wiser to have some semantics in the numbers. So that's the balancing act, and it really depends on a case-by-case situation.
Okay, can you give an example? For instance, you mentioned cadastral information. So I don't know how many plots we have in the Netherlands, but would that be a good case for particularly a particular type of numbering?
Of course, yes, of course. And clearly, the cadastral system existed before computers were around. So there is, in a way, heritage in that, and that system needed to be copied into the computers and into implementations. I would not actually know the actual number of cadastral parcels in the Netherlands, but you can make a guess at that, and it's usually good to make guesses. We have 17 million people in the country. Clearly, not all of them own a parcel, but perhaps 1 in 3 does. So that would give you anything around 6 or 7 million parcels, perhaps. There will be some business parcels added to that, but that will not amount to a whole lot more. And then there are some public lands, etc., that may also be parcel-like. So all in all, top it to 10 million, that would be it. Mm-hmm. And so that also is an important piece of information because it tells you how many you could expect. You would want to design your system to be a little bit future-proof. So perhaps you want to make sure that you can accommodate at least 50 million so that for the near future you're covered. Yeah. And then you need to look at how you get that represented. And different systems do that in different ways. My personal favorite is any type of database management system, simply because they come with really nice features that are important in these big data sets. Mm-hmm. Features of making sure that no mistakes are made, that you have some automatic control in place for the typical errors that may result. Mm-hmm. And in those systems, you have numbering schemes that are well implemented and that give you the support that you would require.
Okay. Is there something that you are working on right now, where you face some issues with identification?
No, not in the sense that we're developing new technology. It is something that you need to be fully aware of when you design these systems for serious applications. Mm-hmm. And clearly, a country's national cadastral system is an important application. Mm-hmm. Because it links quite directly to the economic situation, and it is about rights and valuable goods and real estate. So you need to get that done properly, and it is one of those things that when you design an information system, you should take care of carefully and make sure that you devise a system that works and that will continue to work. So it's bulletproof, so to say.
Okay, and what is the status of database? Let's say if you look at a database of a governmental organization, is it organized well with identification? Like if I were to start working on a new place, what should I expect?
This is, I'm afraid, rather variable. I think in the Netherlands, the cadastral information systems are top-notch. They are amongst the world's best. They're very technically well designed. But as you know, here at ITC, we also collaborate with agencies elsewhere on the planet. And quite often there, the situation is more dire. The systems may not even all be digital. There may still be a paper-based trail. In part, the system may still be paper-based themselves. And then clearly the control over identification is a lot weaker. And quite often these identifiers were devised many years ago. They carry history, so to say, and there may typically be problems with that. So that is one thing that we are concerned with and that we need to really care about when we go in. It's one of the first questions we pose. How do you identify things?
Okay. And for instance, in this case, when you have a heritage of documents, and you need to convert this thing to digital, then you cannot anymore use the same kind of identification, or you shouldn't. And how do you do this?
Well, so again, this is case-based. Quite often we find that the identification system that is in use is problematic, will not hold up in the future, or may already show cases where things are simply no longer unique. And then they need to come perhaps with also the year of identification, so that we can sort of link it to the system at hand at that moment. And quite often what we then do is, well, let's keep what we have there, so that we can always revert back to old identification systems, because there will, in the general system, be references to those identifiers. But we will then install a new identifier system that we know is globally unique, will last for a long time. We'll put up, say, a big serial mechanism there, and that will last for quite a bit longer, at least until the end of time sometimes.
Do you want to be a GeoHero as well? Then take the first step and click the subscribe button and then the bell button to always be the first to know when one of our GeoHeroes posts a new video.